Greetings fellow Earthlings and welcome back to Darlingbrough Sci-Fi Builds. I'm Richard. If you've been watching my channel recently, you will know about my airlock door, which is going to be embedded into the side of a mountain. So far, I have built the actual airlock itself using random greeblies, lots of pieces of scrap, random bits of rubbish, and some basic modelling materials. I've also created some rock faces surrounding the airlock door as well. This will be the entrance to the extraterrestrial base. So to continue this build, I am going to be installing some interesting features. Let's have a look, shall we? Now, as you can see, I have not built the rocks all the way up to the top of the walls. This is not a mistake. I have actually done this deliberately because in my planning of this design, I felt that the entrance to any extraterrestrial base would have some kind of equipment, such as some kind of oxygen generator, some kind of equipment to provide some electronics or some communications, and perhaps some type of venting or extraction device outside of the airlock as well. For these pieces of external equipment, I decided that by using some plastic packaging, which I felt had a very interesting shape, I could achieve some interesting looking pieces for the model. For the oxygen generator, I decided to use the front piece of packaging taken from a pack of 9-volt batteries. I felt it had an interesting shape and interesting details could be added. One of the pitfalls I soon discovered with using plastic packaging was that because it was so thin, it was very flimsy. In order to resolve this issue, I decided to fill the void of the plastic packaging using some foam pieces. I simply cut the foam pieces to size and then used a hot glue gun to stick them into place. As this part of the model was never going to be visible, it didn't have to look particularly neat. The foam padding provided the support that I required, and then I was able to start adding details to these models. For my oxygen generator unit, I decided to keep things fairly simple. I wanted to include a vent, the purpose of which was to extract atmosphere from outside the base, the main unit itself, which was for processing this atmosphere into oxygen, and then some delivery pipes which ran directly into the rocks. For the communications device, I wanted this to look fairly high-tech and have some satellite dish-shaped antenna. I found this container, which I felt looked very interesting. However, as this packaging was from a snack delivery service, it had the logo in the middle of the packaging. I decided to cover it up using the back of a remote control and some lollipop sticks, and then I applied some extra details onto the top of that. Raiding one of my greebly bins, I found some very interesting looking greeblies that I felt would look like equipment that could be used for sending and receiving of data. I felt that these represented satellite dishes or antenna, and I felt that this worked really well. And then I found this piece here, which I felt would look like some kind of electrical connection, and this fitted in perfectly as well. Once I had found all the pieces that I wanted to add to the communications device, I then used some thin down super glue, or CA glue, to stick them all into place. I also felt that this communications device would have some sort of cable running out of it, be it for power or maybe transferring data to and from the satellite dishes, and so I used some broken hair bobbles, and these fit snugly into this socket here. As it was quite flexible, I plan on moving it so that it will fit nicely onto the rock and I will be able to pin it in place. For the air extraction units, I decided to use some bottle lids as I felt that they represented some nice big external fans which could be used to extract any air or debris or fumes from the inside of the base and pump them outside. I did have a small issue when I applied the padding to the inside of the plastic container I was going to use for one of the extraction units. The hot glue actually melted the plastic slightly. However, rather than just abandoning the piece and throwing it in the bin, I decided to turn it into a feature. Using a lighter, I deliberately melted one of the lids I was using as the fan. Because the plastic had melted, it looked like one of these extraction devices had actually overheated at some point, and it became warped and bent out of shape, and it caused a small accident in which it was damaged. Now, it would be interesting to know, if you are building a model or a piece of terrain or a piece of scenery, do you create a scenario to surround that as well? Do you build it with a specific storyline in mind, or do you just whack a load of bits together and make something that looks cool? It'd be really interesting to know, so please leave your comments down below and share your thoughts and feedback. The next stage was to create the top of the airlock. With regards to the extraction units, I wanted them to appear on top of the airlock door itself. So I created an extension to the wall behind the airlock using some cardboard. As the upright plastic runners already had some protrusions sticking out of them, I decided to use them to hold the cardboard back piece in place. I then stuck all three of the extraction units in place in the spaces that they were going to appear. I felt that this worked out very well, although there was a little bit of a problem with some of the spacing. However, again, as I mentioned before, this was going to be one of the melted and deformed pieces, so it didn't really matter too much. Once I had stuck all of these devices together, it was then time to start priming them. As I've mentioned before, I absolutely love the priming stage of any model build. I feel that it's the first time that you can see the model come together as one complete piece. Taking advantage of the glorious hot weather we have here in the UK for once, I left the devices outside for about half an hour to dry. I then applied a coat of rust-coloured primer over the model as well. As these devices were going to be left outside of the facility, I decided to paint them with an undercoat of rust. Now, I'll be honest with you, I was expecting it to be slightly darker, but upon testing it actually came out rather orange. However, all is not lost, because this will not be the final finish of these devices. I then mixed together a couple of shades of acrylic paint, one black, one brown, and used a sponge to stipple rust texture all over all of these elements. I made sure that any areas that would naturally have more rust appeared darker, whereas any areas with a flat surface appear lighter. As I was applying rust to the underneath of the pipes on the oxygen generator unit, unfortunately I managed to break this off. However, all is not lost, because once I've finished repainting it, I can then just simply glue it back into place. One of the last things that I did was to put down a metal flooring on the entrance to the airlock. Now, I initially planned on using the bottom of a plastic crate, which I managed to obtain from my local supermarket. But after a little while, I decided against doing that and decided instead to create my own pattern using a laser cutter. I kept the design fairly simple and created some alternating shapes which I felt kind of mimicked hard-wearing grill texture as you would expect to see on the floor. I cut this out in some thin acrylic sheeting and then spent a little bit of time just removing the shapes from the grill. I must admit it was actually quite satisfying removing all these shapes, and I also kept them as well because you never know, I could use them as greeblies in the future as well. In order to make sure that the flooring piece fit in nicely, first of all I created a paper template and then transferred that design onto the acrylic sheet. I simply used some thick marker pens just to make sure that I had enough space, and then cut out the shape using my rotary tool. One thing I will say about when you cut acrylic, it does leave some crispy edges, but this is actually quite satisfying to remove. I deliberately left the acrylic sheet slightly larger than the gap because I decided I wanted to embed it as best as I could. Once again, using my rotary tool, I cut out some grooves at the bottom and then slid the plastic acrylic sheet into place. In order to stick it into place, I simply used a few drops of very thin super glue before giving it all a spray with the super glue activator. Once the flooring piece had dried and it was nice and stuck into place, I then just put everything back together, pinning some of the elements together just using some clamps just to see what it looked like. I must admit I'm incredibly happy with how it's turning out so far. There's still a little bit of work to do. I still have to finish the rocks at the top of the diorama and also give it a full paint job and just add some extra details in as well. However, if you do want to see the next stage, then you will have to make sure that you are subscribed to this channel, as that will be in the next video. As I've mentioned previously, if you want to see the next video the second I upload it and not have to wait until it's been scheduled, then you can get an exclusive early preview by simply buying me a coffee. Any donations that you do make through Buy Me a Coffee, they go towards materials, equipment and tools that I use to create videos and content for this channel. So if you do appreciate and you like what I'm doing, then please give the channel a bit of support, buy me a coffee and stop my throat from going dry talking so much. Appreciate it. In the meantime, if you haven't seen my previous videos on this build, check them out here, and also there's other videos available on my channel as well, and I will see you again next time. Thanks.